Hey guys, Tiago here with Classical Technology, and today we're looking to do a sort of budget build that is staying under a $2,000 budget and trying to see if we can do a really nice water cooling system that could actually run 4K games, perform nice, and still look aesthetically really beautiful. So let's get into it and let's see what we can do. Now, you'll definitely be able to choose different hardware options depending on what your taste is, like Intel versus AMD. But I'm going to go over some of the things I chose here, and that way you can see where you can save a little or maybe have a little more space in your budget. Let's talk about the big item first, which is the graphics card. In this case, I have an Nvidia Titan Xp graphics card. Now this is the one that's a couple generations old, but it's still very, very fast, right about what a 1080 Ti was, maybe a little bit less. And a 1080 Ti is equal to about a 2080 in today's terms. The only difference really is you're not getting the new RTX features, the ray tracing, which is still in its infancy. So unless you really want that, technically you could probably substitute a 2070 in the place of this card. For this build, you may want to find a few items used if you really want the best bang for your buck. For example, this Titan Xp I was able to buy with the water block on eBay for under $600. Usually just the water block can be around $100 to $150 plus the graphics card. So to get everything in one package, knowing you're going to water cool, is a really good deal. Now for the motherboard, I decided to go with the Z390 Asus Strix E, which is a pretty okay motherboard. It's not necessarily high performing. It does have a couple of minor issues, but in general for the price, you can even get them a little bit cheaper now. You can do that and pair it with maybe a 9600K. Even prices have been going down considerably recently. I think it's around $200 now. You could also substitute that with a nice AMD X570 motherboard, maybe even the Asus Hero, even though that's going to be a little bit more expensive, possibly a 3700X, but then you may start to get a little close to that 2000 budget. 3600X is probably the sweet spot for gaming, and if you do a little bit of multi-core performance workloads. But in my case here, I used the 9600K. It's a part that I had previously, and in general, I think it's pretty good performance. Now for the power supply, you don't need something too crazy, but nothing too minor either. In this case here, I have a G3 750 watt power supply. You can get something like an 850 or even 750 is probably the lowest I would go, especially with a Titan. You want to give yourself a little bit of headroom. For RAM, I have the G-Scale Trident Z, which you can get them. RAM prices went down considerably, so you could definitely fit that in. If you notice the cables, they're Cablemod cables. You don't have to do custom cables, but in my opinion, they just look amazing. The Pro cables are usually around $100, and you could probably fit that into this budget. Now, the water cooling, as you can see, I have 360 radiator on the top and a 240 on the front. That's a Hardware Labs on the front and an EK 360 on the top. Prices are generally okay for these radiators, and they're very good performance. Now the fans are somewhere where I really did go out maybe a little too crazy. It's the NB E-Loop noise blocker fans, which are actually very high-end fans. They're not RGB, but they usually cost around maybe like $25 a piece, but they're amazing for water cooling. They're very, very quiet, very, very good fans. You can definitely go cheaper here. It may affect your noise to performance ratio a little bit, but if you want to keep this build even closer to the $1,500 range, you could definitely do it with water cooling. Now the pump I'm using there, it's an EK D5 pump and res. And that holder, you can use the EK holder. That happens to be a Singularity Computers holder, just because I had an extra one. The fittings, I'm actually using Bitspower. You can also use EK. You can even buy one of their kits that would have most of this stuff. You may just have to add a second radiator, and then obviously the blocks. For the CPU block, I'm also using an EK block. Likewise for the GPU block. And now for the case, you can really do a million different types of cases. This one is a Phanteks Evolv Atx. It's not the newer X model, it's the one that came out previously. You can get them for a good price. It's just a really high quality case. Like, everything is heavy, well made, not too much plastic. But here you can really go crazy and do a lot of different cases. You know, you can get a Lee and Lee Dynamic, which everybody gets, maybe one of the Fractal Design cases, maybe even a Be Quiet case if you want to be a little bit different. So the case in that $100 to $200 range, you really have a lot of options. I'm not sure for this build I would go much cheaper than $100, just because you're trying to get it to that, you know, $1,500 to $2,000 budget. So you do have a little space, and you want to make sure your components kind of earn a case that really match the stature of what you're trying to do. In terms of the hard drive, SSDs have become really cheap, and I would really recommend an M.2 SSD. Definitely one of the best performance to money value ratio you can get right now. Probably the Intel like 660p. It's not the fastest, but you can get them really cheap. I think I saw a 1 terabyte and it was around $80. 2 terabyte is like $180, which is pretty crazy for a, you know, M.2 SSD. Obviously, you could also get a Samsung 970 EVO. It's going to be a little more expensive, but you'll get some better performance. Even I've used before the WD, you know, black. They're pretty good. You know, no issues with them. You know, any of the Intel drives are good. Samsung is always excellent. So you do have, you know, a lot of performance per dollar that you can get in this range. You can really easily fit that in there without any issues. Now, in terms of RGB, if you notice this build, I did keep a little darker in terms of the block on the graphics card. You can't see anything. Usually you can see the liquid, but in this case, I just happened to have the block that was blacked out, and I kind of like the look. It really makes it unique, and it kind of hides it in there. But when you really look, it's really cool how the green kind of goes up against the, you know, the black of that EK block. These fans also don't have RGB, but I do have a dark side LED strip that's right below that top tube, just to give you that illumination. That way, when it's on, you can really see the components well, or else it kind of, you know, gets a little bit dark. But in terms of RGB effects, you don't have to spend too much. Sometimes you might be able to get like an EK fan, you know, the Vardar like RGB fans, or even a Corsair fan. Just keep in mind you're going to need a separate controller for that, and they're a little bit more expensive, so it may go over your budget. Another important point I'd want to talk about is fan control, which is very important in a water-cooled build like this. As you can see, this one has 2 radiators powering both the GPU and the CPU. So you can't really connect everything to the motherboard and just say, all right, go off the temperature of the CPU, because your GPU is actually more important when you're gaming, so it's going to be out of whack. What I like using is the Aquacomputer Quadro, which is a small unit. It's around $59. You can get it at Performance PCs, you know, either on Amazon or their website. It's smaller than the Aqua Aero, but it does a lot of the same things in terms of fan control. You can connect the fans to the different headers. It has 4 headers. You can connect the pump. That way you can control everything, put a temperature sensor, control the GPU based on the temperature sensor of the water, so that way your fans gradually ramp up and they don't start going crazy up and down, and they'll ramp up and keep the water temperature at an equilibrium, keeping your components cool, and more importantly, keeping performance good as well as noise down, which in a water cooling build, you always want to make sure that those things are handled and really optimized in terms of performance and silence, or else you can just throw any cooler in there and not really care that it sounds like a vacuum cleaner. So that's why a lot of times we do water cooling, is to reach that little optimized area where the performance is amazing and you can't even hear it, or at least reduce the sound considerably. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on this $2,000 water cooling build. Leave a comment below if you have any questions. Please like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.